Hello, everyone. So welcome. Diego mentioned we're very happy to see so many people in this space, and we're excited to have a fantastic panel with artists joining us from Mexico, North America, and the Netherlands. We brought them together today, and they were so kind to join us because we believe their works are inspiring and critical in different ways in thinking with different aspects of coloniality and decoloniality, food and plant politics. We're asking, in a way, we're asking in this symposium, what can art and creativity do, and what can they help us do during really dark times globally, as we witness unspeakable violence against humans intersecting with environmental catastrophes, rising fascism, and the far right across the world. So we're very happy that we could be here with us to think through these really big and unsettling questions. So without further ado, let us begin. We'll go through 4 presentations in the next couple of hours and performances, and we will do questions and comments at the end. As Diego has mentioned, but for those of you who didn't join at the very start, we will be recording this session. So the first speaker is Ala Abu Asad. He'll give us a performative reading. Ala is a Palestinian artist and researcher whose work considers themes related to plants, language, it's basically the language that we use to talk about nature, and questions of mobility and place. He does this through different media, including photography, film, and interactive installations. So I leave the floor to you, Ala. Thank you very much.
Well, coming up next, we'll have Mariana sharing with us. We're moving on to Cocina Colaboratorio. Cocina Colaboratorio, I'll briefly introduce, as its name suggests, is a collaborative project. It brings together artists, designers, farmers, cooks, and academics across disciplines into an exploration of food and sustainability, considering the traditional and future foodways in 3 Mexican agricultural communities. Cocina Colaboratorio focused their work on the role of collective cooking and the kitchen as a space of collaboration and transformation, from where we can build more just and sustainable futures. Today, representing Cocina Colaboratorio, we have Mariana Martinez. Mariana is a spatial and social designer based in Mexico City and Amsterdam. She is co-founder and one of the co-coordinators of Cocina Colaboratorio. Co-coordinators? Yes, I think that's the right word. I'll let Mariana speak for herself now.
Thank you very much, Diego, for the introduction. Well, yes, as Diego mentioned, I'm here representing a very wide collective of people. I don't know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yes. Perfect. All right. Yes, so we are a collective of people ranging from the arts, culinary practices, agriculture, community, children, elder people, farmers, and scientists. And we get together to try to understand how our food systems work today and how we can create better steps for a more just and sustainable future. And why foods? I think food is one of our main drivers for environmental degradation. In this plantation scene, where our food is being produced still in the logics of the plantation, food is not only become a threat to our ecosystems, but also to our knowledge systems and to our social systems. So looking at food implies rethreading all the different
Mariana, your voice went, I think.
Now?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to put my camera off just in case that's taking some Yeah. So we like to understand what are the relationships between what we eat, what we cultivate, and how we inhabit a place. Um, the actual model where we are living now, the model that creates a metropolitan imposition to our lives, um, intertwines all kinds of dynamics of how we inhabit a place, how we relate to a place, and how we eat ultimately. We like to understand the concept of biocultural memory and biocultural practices and biocultural knowledge, which is the knowledge that has been developed throughout the interaction of nature and people for as long as our humanity, and that has created most of our foodscapes, but that is now fractured um, because of the imposition of industrial agriculture. So, looking at all the biodiversity that we have in different parts of the planet, is also looking at the intrinsic relationship between humans and non-humans throughout history. For looking into that and understanding um, our different complex relationships, we are threading and interweaving different types of knowledges in a transdisciplinary practice. That means that we engage in co-living and co-experiencing throughout different practices like cooking, for example, um, as an active and committed participation from a standpoint of a horizontal perspective as well. Also trying to understand how to rethread knowledge beyond the, let's say, the colonial systems of science, of research, but also beyond, and try to propose a different kind of interaction. We work in Santo Domingo Tomaltepec, Oaxaca, which is an ancestral town where my grandparents are from, with immense biocultural knowledge, and it's the basing of corn and squash and tomato. Domestication, we work also in the agricultural waterscape, the ancient agricultural waterscape of Xochimilco in Mexico City, which is a series of islands to plant different foods. And also in Chiapas, at the south of the rainforest reserve of the Montes Azules, which is a landscape that has been modified almost 80% from rainforest to monocultures and cattle farming. And we basically create arenas. We design arenas for exchange. These arenas are spaces for interacting in different ways. Our main arena is the kitchen, but we also are exchanging around the plots, the agricultural plots, a project called the Biocultural Living Archive, and also community narratives and community economies. So we started to cook together around different street kitchens, where we create a sort of temporary kitchen space for an exchange to happen between all these different actors, to start to understand what is the food systems that are in place right now, what are the problems, what are the desires, and why the kitchen space. I think the kitchen allows to interact in different ways, which are not only in theory, but are also sensorial, are based on memory, are based on affection. Also, cooking for others is a way of reciprocity, of showing reciprocity. We can taste the different landscapes throughout the ingredients, and also practice ways of collaboration through the making of different recipes. So we set these temporary kitchens in these different places, and we invite people from the locality, and farmers and cooks and scientists. And it is also a way to interweave knowledge that doesn't reproduce, as I was saying, like a colonial um, approach to science, and also creates a common ground for interweaving the knowledges. No, in terms of also epistemic justice, we believe that the kitchen space can also be a language, a common language where everybody can meet and talk. We create projects that have to do also with generative design. We create collective designs for understanding the biocultural relationships, for example, but also future perspectives. No, this is what you see here. A mobile seed bank that we call the Biocultural Living Archive, that we made as a prototype for a device for collecting and exchanging seeds and stories of the seeds and recipes, and also inviting people to think for the future what we want to keep and what we want to disperse as knowledge, and what needs to be also guarded as the biocultural knowledge. And this also brings us to questions like, for example, what are the edible and medicinal plants that still exist and resist in the territories, and how we can create intergenerational bridges so that also this knowledge is not being forgotten. And this device is also a ground for exchanging ideas about the future and how we want to cultivate and maintain all that by the biocultural diversity. We also do some, let's say, in artistic interventions in public space. We like to work a lot in public space. Well, so with all these stories and all this information that was developed through the Biocultural Living Archives, we created a series of interventions. This is in Xochimilco, and we dispersed the seeds and its stories through these visit taxis, which is the local transport, to reclaim the waterscapes and the knowledge that is based in the territory through the now urbanized fabric of Xochimilco. And I think what we aim for in this practice is that through participatory art and these kind of interventions, we also reconnect and restore the collective and communal commitment towards our spaces and resources, no, and reconnect through that power and agency of keeping our biodiversity and our biocultural knowledge. And also, we create some communal spaces. So we are also creating some processes for developing communal kitchens and ovens as spaces for conviviality. And we use a lot of storytelling as a place where we can tell each other stories about recipes, about food, about understandings of the past, but also understandings of the future. And this is also a way to disperse the voices and the knowledge of the different people. No, doesn't matter if they are children or elder or scientists or specialists or farmers. Everybody has something to say about how they would want to shape the future of food. And ultimately, we do a long-term practice, insight practice, situated practice that is threading with time a metabolism of change through agentive processes. We believe that by working together and understanding the realities together, but also designing our realities together, we can also propose new ways um, of countering the systems that we are in. This is when we started to create a food forest in Loma Bonita as a proposal to reforest the rainforest with all kinds of medicinal and edible plants. And we also like to work on the plots in collective work, what we call tequios. And basically, through all of these actions, we start to thread different ways of thinking, listening, talking, dreaming, eating, and ultimately it takes us to explore through the different levels of perceptions and stories how we can create better and more sustainable food systems.
Thank you so much, Mariana. There's so much already to talk about, but we have to paddle through and then keep all the amazing points and discussions for the end. So I'm going to introduce the next speaker. Coming up, we have Beatriz Paz. Beatriz is an artist and a researcher engaging with questions of indigeneity, food, and futurity. Her work uses a mix of writing, cooking, and participatory artworks that advocate for food sovereignty. So we're keeping on this thread of food and seeds and plants. Among other projects, Beatriz is one half of the Food Commons, a platform that seeks to challenge alimentary cultural narratives in Mexico. So over to you, Beatriz.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I am delighted to be here with you. And thank you, Diego and Silvia, for the invitation. I am here to present the story of my long-term project, a participatory art series, Ancestral Quelites, Anarchist Quelites. It began in 2018 with an invitation from the Canadian independent curator, Suying Lee, to take part in Alimentary, her curatorial series in which artists reflect on the wisdom embodied between the tongue and the gut. Suying asked me if I consider myself indigenous. I had lost a link to indigenous pathways and territory when my grandparents left their ancestral homes. So obviously I said no, although my face and complexion tell a different story. She responded, then capitalism is winning because that is exactly what it wants you to believe, that you cease to recognize yourself as a person who is heir to an ancestral culture. I have come to understand that staying healthy through culturally appropriate foods, staying alive, and acknowledging myself as a descendant of indigenous peoples constitutes my first act of resistance to colonial capitalism. First, I plan to speak about the milpa, a Mesoamerican polycultural system for amplifying biodiversity, inseparable from the social fabric that sustains community-based ways of being and world-making. The milpa emerged from a confluence of synergies beyond the human, for example, edible wild greens that in central Mexico we refer to as quelites. I shifted my focus and made the quelites the axis of the conversations that will take place in various galleries across Toronto. From mid-2018 onwards, I visited milpas in damp, ashen, urban soils along Puebla, the state of Mexico, and Mexico City. Then the pandemic struck. That did not stop me from sending a pasote via DHL to the Art Gallery of Burlington in Toronto and filling it with a smell akin to that of marijuana. In indigenous language, Nahuatl, a pasote means skunk herb. Masked and all, people went there to collect their little epazote bags. Then I gave an online talk and cooking session to the people, or so the people could learn about quelites, their history, taste, and nutritional properties. As you can see in the title, I had not yet critically reflected on the inherent speciesist colonialism hidden in the concept of superfoods, nor on the self-exotizing essentialism of calling quelites indigenous, when edible wild greens, despite being constitutive or of Amerindian territorial and gastronomic histories, precede even the formation of nation states. Moreover, they currently transcend the category of indigenous, as quelites are essential for working class, communities, for migrants, and for those facing financial precarity. So here you can read my first milestone regarding how to make fissures in dominant narratives and keep a critical approach against normalization of language in our own practice and work. At the beginning of 2021, I received support from the Institute for Anarchist Studies in the United States to produce artwork related to indigenous anarchism. Thank you, IAS, because your support during such a difficult year enabled me to it. Over the following 3 years, I dedicated myself to reflecting on how, through the extractive violence against indigenous land and female indigenous bodies in the region comprising Mexico, Canada, and the United States, all genocidal practices of colonialism are reenacted by interrupting the continuity of cultures, both in terms of the right to be born indigenous and to be nourished by native produce. However, during the pandemic lockdown, although I felt emotionally connected to the issue, it was not part of my daily reality, and actually it prevented me from healing my own wounds. What was present in my everyday life, constantly helping me to heal, sustaining my body, and regulating my nervous system throughout the lockdown, were the quelites and fermented foods. So my milestone number 2 is that departing from the web of essentialism requires working with what is immediate, proximate, and one's own. Between 2021 and 2022, my friend Zoe Hine-Jones invited me to create phytograms with epazote and plant-based photographic emulsions on 16mm film. We began a collaborative project entitled Dupla Molcajete to acknowledge several forms of violence that endanger edible insects in South Mexico. In 2023, Zoe organized the Visualizing Food Waste Field School program, which took place in Milpalta and Xochimilco, centers of agricultural resistance in Mexico. There, I first introduced the concept of anarchist quelites. I had spent a year tracing symbolic relationships between the botanical behavior of edible and medicinal weeds and forms of social organizations such as mutual aid, solidarity, autonomy, transporterism, voluntary association, self-defense, and cooperation. Although these practices are not exclusive to anarchism, they are central to it. Moreover, this conceptual framing emerged from a desire to acknowledge the historical importance of anarchism within the agrarian and peasant movements of 19th and 20th century Mexico. Cocina Colaboratorio became interested in my research and invited me to present it at an encounter titled Quelites as Metaphors of Resistance. We gathered to cook with the anthropologist and traditional cook Nora Estrada in the Chinampa territory of Xochimilco, a lacus shrine zone that is also my ancestral home through my paternal lineage. We reflected on the political, social, economic, cultural, and gastronomic dimension of quelites. I situated quelites within the dimension of deep indigenous time to trace their link to the past and to prefigurative politics, to project that link into the future without means or ends, but rather as pure action oriented toward what we wish to create, as though it were already becoming. As the daughter of an ancestral territory that does not claim me, working on it alongside the local communities who are still rooted there requires me to respect and relearn situated knowledge through non-extractive practices and methods. So we reached the milestone number 3, that faced with dispossession and epistemic erasure, we need to learn situated eco-pedagogies, free from appropriation, but also free from local chauvinism. We must practice justice healing and collectively reflect on the presence of outsiders in ancestral territories and on our ways of being together. If we all eat what is grown there, and if we are asked to walk along campesinos or peasants and step out of urban individualism, how can we do so in the most respectful coexistence and managing our privileges from both sides and for the benefit of all of us? How do we learn to sow freedom and respect in territories contested under colonial capitalist oppression, where we often find a lot of resentment? Almost inevitably, deep time and prefigurative politics led me to the ontological turn that I approach through the Amazonian philosophies of the ancestral future and of multinaturalism. At this point, I was already stammering a different language with ecologies, who no longer appeared to me as merely food, but as something constitutive of my life and of the lives of those who became me before me. Thus, I began to increase my external intimacy, which shaped as collective building of offerings based on ecologies for the Mexican tradition Dia de Muertos, Day of the Dead. My way to reintegrate through a key tradition the idea of plants as persons and ancestors. The first one took place in Xochimilco, supported by Cocina Colaboratoria in 2023. In a collective ritual, I summoned the presence of our deceased human and non-human beloved ones. I called out loud each and every one of their names while handling a printed photograph to their family member, who placed it upon wreaths of wood, a symbol of our belonging and reintegration into the ecosystem. In 2024, my beloved German friend Janina Totzauer and I organized a public program at the Goethe Institute in Mexico City that included a group exhibition, a Quelite altar for Dia de Muertos, and a participatory art exercise. The group exhibition featured the generous participation of 16 artists from 6 countries and 3 continents. Their works, printed on fabric and stitched together in a quilt that formed 3 vertical banners descending from ceiling to floor, were connected by stories of love, drawn by memory, reflecting on grief, loss, death, and rebirth. The offering included The Ancestor of the Future, a wire sculpture in the shape of a baby commissioned from the artist Rosa Arismendi and later covered in ecologies by myself. I conceived of this piece as a strategy to stimulate multinaturalist imagination and to view ecologies, despite the lame anthropocentrism I employed, as beings radically closer to us. Respectfully, ecologies were composted in the streets surrounding the Goethe Institute. The artist, activist, and bioremediator Leto Delgado, known as Quelite de Ciudad, is one of my dearest allies. Leto leads walks to identify the wide variety of edible and medicinal plants in the urban context. I began, just give me a second. Thank you. I began to create the imaginative pacts that became a co-authored work of expanded literature by all participants. At the beginning of each walk, I called to playfully appropriate a shared narrative. We are researchers from the future, scavengers here to study the current human relationship with the edible plants. Or we are composting the underworld, as in the case of this video. Organized as small anarchist-like squads, we tackle specific tasks: written, visual, and audio documentation, deactivation of death technologies, the name I give to waste collection, and poetic games to rename plants. In this way, documentation and solidarity-based cleaning with plants form part of a non-hierarchical collective order. Throughout the walk, Leto teaches us about the plants, and we do not extract their aesthetics, we document them as part of our learning processes, and we collaborate with their environments. At the end, we eat them together. My friend Nathanael Guzman under Project Masa has been another cherished ally, having cooked ecologies for us on several occasions. But in the case of this video, the meal was prepared by gastronomist Andrea Aquino. This is what I have called archaeothnobotanical drifts of biocultural recognition. We walk outside the logics of urban productivity. We learn and play together, engaging to speculative futures. We eat quelites to entangle with them from the gut. And we reach the milestone number 4. Within the collective dimension, molecular synergies transform meaning and allow us to reflect on the fact that extractivism is not only about pipelines and mining, but also how the system extracts our vital space, time, and nutrition on our daily lives. So we are trying to make an aesthetic that is not cosmetic, but that collectivizes practices for life liberation. I would like to acknowledge feasts and the spirit of celebration as inherent to solidarity with quelites. You have here some images with Masa, with my friend Dalila Estrella, and our project, The Food Commons, and a book presentation for anarchist autonomy movements in Latin America. And in all of them, public conversations and eating quelites are part of festive conviviality. Finally, the loop that began during the pandemic through the support from the Institute for Anarchist Studies is now materializing in a series of collaborative works with Los Solidarios de la Voz de la Mate, 6 indigenous Tzotzil peasants prisoners in El Cerezo number 5, El Cerezo de la Mate, which is a prison in San Cristobal de las Casas, Chiapas. During a solidarity visit, a diverse group of activists met with them in August 2024. They received us with fruit, bread, flavored waters, and shared their life stories. They have been held for almost 2 decades. Since then, I have maintained a correspondence in which I ask them questions about their personhood and stories, because judicial processes affecting incarcerated individuals often strip them of their identity, reducing them to a crime, a sentence, or a case number. But I want to know what they remember of their territory, what they dream of, what they like. They undertook a 27-day hunger strike during the COVID pandemic, established an anarchist occupy inside the prison, and have taken part in protests. They appropriated 3 small plots of land and turned them into vegetables gardens where they grow edible and medicinal plants and beans. They have succeeded in receiving their rations from the prison managers directly and uncooked. This allows them to cook in the traditional way, to heal themselves, and to produce a small surplus for other prisoners. In their letters, they say that the only way to care for Mother Earth is by sowing it, that freedom is being able to plant a milpa and walk in the mountains, and that the sweetness of life comes from fruits. I document everything and clean the digital versions of their drawings. I use my imagination to recreate a series of biocultural, symbolic, and spatial relationships as I imagine, and then translate them into collage art. These are the first artworks I have created and were exhibited in a local emergent gallery called Chroma. I am currently working with my friend Juan Manuel Coronel on the production of an animation that will tell the story of Los Solidarios de la Voz de la Mate. This animation is due to be completed by the end of 2025, and additional collaborators are gradually joining the project. The final milestone is about donating our time, giving the best of us to safeguard collective ways, food waste, territorial waste, to preserve foodscapes, and also to exert solidarity with people from vulnerable communities, historically displaced and oppressed, because in my personal case, thinking in general terms led me to live the everyday more consciously. And once connected to the depth political and the political being of wild edible greens, I was pushed to find a real proximity to people in distant contexts, people who struggle for land and food sovereignty that intersects with the major challenges of ecological politics and planetary social crisis. And therefore, I became whole with this small stretch of land that I inhabit and which in turn inhabits me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bea, for that vibrant and exciting intervention. We're gonna move on to our last, but by no means least, intervention with Christine and Jessica. Christine is a multidisciplinary artist exploring questions of cartography, space, coloniality, environmental degradation, and resistance through a wide range of materials and processes, including body cam footage, Adobe, the material, not the software company, and archival research. Jessica is Associate Professor of Native American Modern and Contemporary Art at the University of Delaware. Her work explores the ways Native American art resists colonial ecological violence and opens up avenues for imagining alternative worlds. We're going to screen Christine's short film, Niniwas Belonging Here, and then Christine and Jessica are going to have a conversation. So I'm going to mute myself, play the film. If for some reason you can't hear it or something goes wrong, please do let me know.
And just to let you guys know, it's just a clip of a longer piece. So.
Christine, Jessica, the floor is yours.
That's great. Thank you so much, Diego and Sylvia, for the invitation, and my fellow presenters for those inspiring talks with a lot of interconnection. And Christine, it's so good to be in conversation with you again. This is really a continuation of a conversation we've been in since 2020 when we first screened Ninawas and spoke about it at a climate change themed workshop in Sao Paulo. And we've had this series of both written and informal conversations about our shared interests in the indigenous histories of land care in what is now California, and the rupture of the Spanish mission chain that was established on the coast from 1769 to 1833. And of course, this profound body of work that you've been making since 2019 in response, drawings and sculptures in the medium of Adobe, and the video work that we saw the clip of today. And I thought it might just be nice to start this conversation hearing a bit more from you about the place, the significance of the place where this video unfolds, and sort of how it links to your own kinship networks and family histories in California. Yeah, happy to start with that. I just want to start also with thanking everyone for being here today. And especially the presenters, just so much overlap, I think, in our collective thinking right now. So I see why Sylvia and Diego have pulled us together today. So I'm happy to be with you today. So just to introduce myself, my name is Christine Howard Sandoval. An enrolled member of the Cholone Ohlone in Bakersfield, California, where I grew up. I grew up in the Bay Area. So our traditional territory is in the Central Valley, in the Salinas Valley. Mission Soledad, which is where this clip of video was filmed, is situated kind of on the boundary of our traditional territory, the boundary between ours and Esalen. So I also have Esalen ancestors as well. And the way that Indigenous California was structured kind of prior to contact is that we had, many different really small tribes, small communities of really, really diverse languages. So the Ohlone part of the identification, Cholone, is also significant of the language, which we're also studying. And so a lot of the work that I did, Jessica just mentioned that the video is one piece within a large body of work. The body of work is called A Wall is a Shadow on the Land. And it's comprised of video, works on paper, sculptures, a lot of archival research. So archival research probably is something that we'll get into in the conversation, but the site itself operates right now, as all of the missions do, operate as museums. They're museum spaces that are supported fiscally through state funding, and then locally also through independent grants. And they operate also still as Catholic churches. So they're very unusual and unique in that way. And so when I was going to film in the site, I had to go through the organization that's kind of caretaking Mission Soledad, and kind of talk to them about, my traditional relationship to the site. Our community, we do ceremony in Picnache, which is the traditional area just north of Soledad.
And we often follow up that ceremony by going to Mission Soledad as well. So it's a really important site for our community in Bakersfield. And it was an incredible opportunity for me to just have I had one day to kind of perform this piece, and then collect all the footage and then edit it. I live in Vancouver, Canada, so.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. I was really struck watching this work again and sort of journeying with you by invitation of the body camera through that space of how important it feels to revisit this work 5 years after it was made, and to think about the sort of temporalities of violence that are embedded in this work. I have been thinking a lot about this language of unprecedented that I've been hearing again and again in a United States context, both in relation to these large-scale climate disasters like the Los Angeles fires, the hurricane that devastated sort of the far reaches of North Carolina. And now I'm hearing it as this presidency of Donald Trump is unfolding through assaults on students and artists and activists and immigrants and forests, and so much that is essential to the sort of vitality of collective life in and beyond the United States, and thinking about how, it may, this language may feel right or make sense for those who don't have like a lived or familial memory of genocide, to sort of experience this moment as an unprecedented shock to systems, personal and collective. But that language of unprecedented is so critical in terms of how it impacts the potential for like an allied collective response to these conditions. And of course, some of us have not developed the muscle of courage when faced with state-sanctioned bodily violence, or learned to adapt cultural life ways to rupture, or developed really rich toolkits of resistance, but many have. And so we're not starting from zero. And so I wanted to sort of, I guess, use that to frame a question about how Ninawas is inviting both sort of cognitively and experientially in terms of a kind of cyclicality, posing a kind of cyclicality of colonial violence and its longue durée, right? And potential response as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, thinking in a more expansive way about notions of time, and certainly trying to interrupt a kind of linearity of history through this kind of spiral or cyclical thinking, I think is really important. And it's something that I started making the work about Soledad and more broadly about missionization from a distance. So I was living in New York when I started the work, and then moved to Vancouver, so on the west coast of Canada, still kind of at a distance, thinking about it through talking with people, but also, intellectually. And I think what these videos do, it's not the first time I've made a video using wearable cameras and, technologies of surveillance. But what I like about these videos is that it kind of forces me into an embodied experience in sites that I specifically have ancestral history with. So I usually film in places that I have a relationship with. That's really important to me. And it forces me out of the intellectual archival research and into an embodied experience. And in the case of Soledad, I started to recognize the site as much more than much more than its colonial history. And I started seeing it through the lens of a resistance model, even through the architecture itself. So the architecture is made out of adobe, which is a clay and earth material that gets formed and cured in the sun. And it's very common to places that are, thought of as desert ecosystems. So my grandmother was an adobe brick maker in New Mexico on my mother's side of the family. And so I'd been working with this material, and I started thinking about it when I went to Soledad and did the performance. I started thinking about the material as a kind of archive in and of itself, and that it had this kind of I don't know, there's just this like really visceral feeling when walking through the museum space, the ruin of the original building, that there were all of these elements that were still living. There were all of these, the adobe was kind of melting because of weather, because of time, because that's what it's meant to do. It's an ephemeral material. It's not meant to kind of live like concrete or steel. So because of its materiality, it kind of was revealing in its surface its own history. And I saw that as an aesthetic of persistence that was much more powerful than the kind of Catholic narrative that was being pushed to me and to others who were visiting the mission itself. I felt like, okay, well, this is a different experience. And then there's a section in the video that you're not seeing where I'm kind of walking and touching the surface of the material. And so I feel like that's also another form of reading something, reading a surface, thinking about surface also as an aesthetic, as a form, and a material within the other parts of the work that I was making. So there was this cyclicality, this thing that it was feeling like I was looking backwards, looking forwards at what the site is now, which is primarily agricultural land. So California, in that area of the Central Valley, is known as the bread basket of the United States. And it provides a lot of food right now, and the labor is mostly done by immigrant labor under really, really uncontrolled and horrendous conditions. And so there was that kind of reality that was happening in the moment when I was making the video, on top of thinking about what California is preparing for, which is like another really big flood that happens every 200 years. So I was thinking about this Central Valley, which has a history and a memory of filling up as a lake all the way from San Francisco, so Northern California and the Bay Area, all the way to Southern California. So it has a history of that. Climate scientists know about this history. They're trying to create a lot of kind of really fancy information around educating the population to expect this flood that's going to happen. So I was thinking about all of those things when I was in Soledad, which is that cyclical thing.
Yeah, the cyclicality of violence, but also the temporalities that precede colonial arrivals in that space that are still touchable. And yeah, that image of I wish if we could see the full video, we would see your hands touching the melted adobe walls toward the end of the piece. That really sort of makes that connection viscerally. And I remember too when visiting, I don't remember which of the long chain of missions it was, but I remember sort of a wall of like the original adobe and seeing like plant bodies. So this archive, yes, of coerced labor and incarceration, but also of seed, right? Of native seed that is sort of there to be activated again, that you sort of activate again in this work. I feel like we should talk about the central phrase, genocide is climate change, before we get too much further, because I think there's a really important sort of reversal of like causal temporal order with this phrase. I just a couple evenings ago was rereading a 2014 essay by Rebecca Solnit, and the title of that essay was Climate Change is Violence, more the standard flow that we're sort of used to in terms of critical discourses around Anthropocene and climate change today. And, you know, she's outlining rightly that the sort of policies to continue the business of extraction should be seen as an assault on all life. But genocide is climate change potentially reverses that causal order. And I wondered if you wanted to sort of reflect a little bit with me on what all is sort of bound up in that phrase.
Yeah, so I think a lot about this notion of preservation, you know, these terms like preservation, sustainability, and I think about the history of just climate activism. And a lot of that is predicated on, it still is predicated on this notion of the binary, you know, humans being separated from the environment in some way. And so I felt, you know, what the reversal does is that it insists on a much longer relationship between the planet and the people who inhabit it, not just the people, but all of the various beings that we have kinship with. And I read when I was kind of getting ready to do the project, I encountered a study around it was coming out of England. It was a medical study, or it was a science study actually, on the Ice Age and what they call the Great Dying. The Great Dying being, you know, the genocide, the mass death of North American Native population. And so what that did, according to the science paper, which is cited in the paper that Jessica and I collaborated on, what that did was increase the production of CO2, carbon dioxide, because there weren't the inhabitants that were maintaining different areas in Turtle Island. And so thinking about, you know, the precedent of indigenous communities that were actively maintaining, having a relationship, harvesting, and, you know, changing in relationship the bioculture of Turtle Island. And then when you suddenly have, through genocide and violence, you suddenly have the eradication of that maintenance, then you had this really quick and massive regrowth of just the ecology. And that actually wasn't a positive thing. And according to the data, was something that caused a major climate shift to happen in Europe. So it's part of what created what they also call the Little Ice Age, which is something that happened, according to their estimates, for about 500 years, at the same time as exploration. So that really, really was an exciting encounter for me, because it was this proof, data that was supporting the relationship that we you know, a lot of our stories, a lot of our ceremonies, a lot of our creation stories, our knowledge is kind of based on this belief that we have this kinship with the land. You know, all indigenous peoples throughout the globe have this. And then when you remove a people from their land, you actually affect the climate in a negative way. And so that that in this case had effects that were going on for, 500 years. So I thought, well, this kind of reverses the idea of humans being only a blight on the planet. And it insists on the possibility that we can actually have a better relationship with the areas that we live in, the places that we live in, the planet that we live on. And I don't know. So that really, I thought that was politically a really important something that I wanted to prioritize in the video.
Yeah. And
So,
placing that alongside, oh, yes, we will transition.
Are we out of time?
I was just going to say that sort of placing that alongside the citation of sort of traditional land care practices by women in California really hits home this idea that the kind of stability of the climate and this sort of environment of plenty that, precedes the colonization of California is also a human collaboration, right? It is human caused. It's anthropogenic in a very different way than we're used to thinking about climate impacts. But yeah, I would love to bring other people back into the conversation. Sylvia, do you want to step in?
Yes. So thank you so much. It was to all of you who presented. I feel like there's so much to talk about. I do feel that the sentence, the formulation of genocide is climate change is very powerful and is a way that I think in some ways touches upon everyone else's presentations in different ways. So I was making notes because I feel like there are a lot of really interesting themes in relation to the language, the relationship between like genocide, extinction, the idea of the archive, futurity. So there are many prompts. I do have a question that I want to ask everyone, all the panelists, but I also want to make this more democratic as a process. So I'm also going to give everyone in the audience a chance now if you want to ask questions, and I'll try and ask mine as well. If you do want to talk, if you don't mind, unmuting yourselves and showing your face as well, that would be nice, just to give back some of the warmth and relationality that we have benefited from in your lovely talks. So I'm just saying if anyone wants to speak. Right, while people, I don't see anyone for now. Oh, Diego, yes.
I also have a question, but Celia, please, you ask yours first. And
yeah, we use the benefit.
If anybody else has a question, please raise your hand.
We'll just take over. Right, so the question that I have, I guess, for all of you is about language, because I think like we touched upon the question of like language as a violent tool against plants, as Ala was telling us at the start, and all the sort of violence that comes with that. There's also different ways in which language neutralizes experiences or flattens experiences, talking about extinction versus talking about genocide, or the implications with that. So a question that might be a bit big, but still, is how did you individually develop a language to be able to speak about this violence and to speak against this violence? Because there's so many ways in which plants and nature come into it, but it's also, I guess, a individual journey to try and build a language to express these things. So I would be curious, and visually as well, what your journey in very few words has been. Yeah, Mariana.
Yeah, hi. I think it's a very interesting question. Can you hear me? It's a very interesting question to talk about language. And for example, in our case, as a transdisciplinary project where there are many languages being used associated to different ways of relating to research, to land, to food, to art. And I think the question of creating common languages has been very much part of our practice, everyday practice, where we also have to find ways to name and to visualize what we want to share without, um, without using too much of an academic jargon, for example, without also reducing the different complexities as well of a situation, of a place, of a moment, as you say. And I think something that we've found in common languages are also these tools for convivial interactions. So food becomes also a language, and visualizing the seeds and the relationships to people. A recipe can be also, a form of telling a story. Um, Different voices telling stories from their different ways. And I think there is not one unified language. And I think that's also very important for us to understand, because we can all decide to name, for example, genocide. And I think that's great. But I think people will also refer to it as, for example, erasure or something that has been forgotten or something that is being lost. And I think it is also very important for us to not only use one word, but a multiple voices to refer to certain things, and also especially to embody that care for what we are um, trying to perceive or trying to talk about, and trying to taste. So for us, language is also embodied and it's also being activated. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw many people nodding, so I think that anybody wants to join in or add or any more thoughts on this.
I think that this term genocide, I think if I'm going to just follow up on what Mariana was saying, I think language is actually very important. And one of the things that we kind of talk about in the text that Jessica and I co-wrote was this term genocide, right? The term is actually a very political word. It has policy. It's been defined. It has, it's been debated. It is currently been debated. I've also, there's been an attempt by institutions to erase that word. I think it's a very particular word that has a very particular weight and effect, and it's speaking about a certain right towards justice. It's speaking politically, not just politically, but there's something about the way that it has been defined by the United Nations. And so I don't use it lightly, is what I'm trying to say. And I wouldn't also maybe substitute it myself. Like I wouldn't substitute it for another word. I think it has a very particular intention and history that is more than erasure. I think erasure happens on multiple levels. And I think, right now I'm working with the Cholon language. And we are working as a community on bringing the language back and building a database for it, which has been erased by, first the Spanish language and then the English language. But I feel like the word genocide has a very particular violence to it that is about the literal disappearance of bodies. And I don't know. So I in the video I'm using it in a very particular way, and it evokes a certain level of response, I think, too.
Yes, we have Tula. Do you want to?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all so much for your performances and presentations. It was really, really moving. So thank you. Hello.
Sorry to interrupt. You're cutting quite a bit.
Sorry?
You were cutting. It was a bit hard to understand.
Oh, okay. I'll turn off my camera.
Sorry.
We're not. Is that better?
Not really. Do you want to write it in the chat?
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I'll move to the chat.
Yeah. While you write it, Beatriz, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. Regarding your question about the language, I think that acts and behavior patterns are also forms of language. And in this sense, I seek to produce a collective or to ignite a collective aesthetic to healing with all these collective visual recordings and the way people rename plants. I hope that we also learn how to behave in a more healing and connective and social way of support and working with these plants in a colonized context leads me to dealing with the liminality between Latin, Spanish, indigenous languages, and that deepens somehow the understanding of what plants can do and how they remediate certain soils, how are they cooked by certain populations, and also trying to heal the colonial wounds through plants and their temporalities, their smells, their textures, understanding them not only by flavor or by the eyes or with the eyes, but also touching them, listening the leafage, and engaging with them in a more personal way is requires to talk to the inner suffering and to the inner pain that has been passed through generations, and to talk in the colonizer within us, the people that is inherently violent, because it's so easy to idealize and to create concepts around what we call nature or other beings that are non-human or more than human. And if we the cycles of life, violence and death and decay are in all beings. So embracing that in ourselves and choosing the parts of us that want to co-create life and expand biodiversity and make space for most of the thoughts, those that we can't be intolerant to, because there are others that we need to be intolerant to, is also a way to connect with the language of life. And I will leave it there.
Thank you so much. I don't see the question in the chat yet, so Diego, did you want to say something, or Ala, did you want to add something?
Yeah, actually, I was just thinking about what Beatriz was saying. You know, communicating with plants requires a different language, one that is different from the, like, it's non-verbal language, I would say, like plants. I mean, I live in the Netherlands where there is a very like a clear division between nature and non-nature. Basically, wherever you go, there are signs that say like it's a nature area, do not enter. People don't forage here. When I forage, people look at me like in a very, like weird way. What are you doing? So, and what I was saying is that many plants like to be touched, basically. So this language can be, like transferred into the bodily language or the touch or the senses, other senses. So, and many plants actually they depend on being touched or being cut from to keep growing, to spread their seeds. Actually, like there is a plant called plantago, and that plant basically, it's like with our footprints, it just moves from one place to another. So, and I think living in a place where, like this language is cut, or like this barrier is there, like the presence of the barrier between nature and non-nature, not nature, like it cuts the language with the plants. So yeah, this is what I wanted to add.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember in another conversation, Ali, you were describing like looking at plant seeds for a long time to be in a relationship with them. So what you were saying about the nonverbal just made me think about, also just being with a plant or observing the plant or just being in the presence of in different ways. We have the question now by Tula, so I'm going to read it out loud. She's saying, I have a question for Beatriz. I can resonate to the idea of reclaiming indigeneity as an act of resisting colonialism. Would you want to share how this experience was for you?
Yeah, thank you, Tula. Thank you so much for this question. I come from, in both of my lineages, I come from indigenous people. From my maternal side, my grandmother was a Tutunacu indigenous woman from Veracruz, and she fled home because she was going to be married to a man of 40 years old when she was 12. She didn't know how to write. She was a kid that was growing the milpa and cooking and making clay pottery and braiding cotton and stuff like that. And she left her ancestral home without knowing her ancestral language because her father, which means my great-grandfather, was beating her, and my great-grandmother when Tutunacu was spoken in the territory. From the other side of my family, my paternal side, I am the descendant of peasants, like also Xochimilcas and Mamoshkas. And they, in my grandfather generation, became car mechanics. So the relation to growing the land was stopped. I am an only child from diverse parents, and I grew up being attacked in school for being brown, even though most of the people in my country is brown. I was called Negro. I was called police neck because policemen, they spend so much time under the sun that they have like a darker neck. So when I was a child, people called me that. People called me monkey. And I grew up thinking I was the ugliest being in the world, which no one is. We're all exotic. And I grew up feeling that I was lacking something because I lived in an urban environment and I didn't understand that. But when I was with my grandparents, there was something in their ways of preparing long table foods, of giving food to the neighborhood, to caring of unknown people, exercising hospitality, being extremely tender, enjoying hard labor, working with the tiny little beings and scaling the meaning of life through joy and storytelling together. I didn't know that was my indigenous heritage. I just felt it. I just felt that it was something there that reflected me. And I was looking and searching for myself till I found indigeneity, but I felt so separated. So I started digging in these stories, and that led me to a bigger body of work where I propose to you that if you don't know your ancestral heritage, you can exercise the ancestral belonging through the territory you are in because someone took care of it in the past. You can see and understand that different animals, different plants have created also our DNA in long chains of care. So you can see them as your ancestors. Even what you ate this morning becomes you and you become your food. So you can feel deeply rooted wherever you are by supporting that land, by understanding that land, and also supporting vulnerable populations. So you can make a repertoire of human and natural practices that resonate with your soul and with your heart, and that take the best out of you to face the violence we are all exposed to, and choose that as your ancestral lineage, because at the end we are all intertwined, interconnected, and sometimes this dualism that separates us from gender, race, class, and whatever is just fear. So the way to counterbalance fear is through love, and love sometimes it's raging as well. And that's why we need a lot of justice healing, and it starts by connecting with the immediate. Either it's your family and your story or the people that surrounds you. Thank you, Tula.
Thank you. So we're kind of already getting towards the end, but I'd like to maybe fit in one or two more questions. So yeah, anyone has one?
Also, as a little pause, we are technically at the ending time that we've had, but we have a bit more time for those who want to stay. If you want to keep talking, if somebody needs to leave, you can leave, but we're very happy to keep going if everybody else is as well, all the speakers are. That being said, please bring your questions and comments if you have them. And if you keep being shy, I'll just ask mine because I really want to ask it. So I was really struck by something Christine and Jessica said about Christine's video, that this thing is recorded in a place called Misión Soledad. And that really struck me because of what it means in Spanish. No, it means Soledad means solitude or loneliness. Solitude mission, loneliness mission. And so it stayed with me, that idea that this name betrays a lot of this colonial gaze, no? The Spanish come to these valleys where there's already humans and there's already other non-humans living there. There's a bunch of relations, which Christine's video kind of calls attention to, but they call it soledad, they call it loneliness. And so like this just makes me think of, on the one hand, like the colonial perspective, this coloniality that sees us as separate from nature, and the way everybody, all of you through your presentations mentioned this idea of kind of not just humans as people and not just humans as the only people in place. So like Ala said, or rather the Japanese not with Ala's voice said, I am a political plant time and again. Bea spoke about plants as persons and ancestors. Mariana talked of this intrinsic relationship between humans and non-humans across history. And my question is a little bit like, how do we go beyond that colonial modern solitude? How do we go beyond this idea that we're separate? And how can art as a praxis help us achieve that? And anyone who wants to answer, please do.
Well, maybe I'll just, I don't know if I can answer your question, Diego, but I can give a little bit of insight into the name, which is a much longer name. So it's Mission Nuestra Señora de la Soledad. And so the story behind that name, from what I've read, from what was written by the padres when they were first there, was that it was based on the encounter with the community that was living on the site, and that it was based on the thinking about language. I think it's interesting that we're talking about this after language, because it was a listening to a woman who was presenting herself, an indigenous woman who was presenting herself, who I think was probably from the Chitiquilis, which is the Esalen village that was there. And she was presenting herself and her name, and the padre heard it as similar to Soledad. And so he just kind of felt he took it upon himself to rename her and the site after the saint that belongs to the Catholic faith, which is Guadalupe de la Soledad. And so that was also very significant in terms of how not only were they renaming the site, that the name is very significant, and that's a form of colonization, right? It's a form of mapping, but that also they were changing the names of individuals. So everybody was given the name of Maria, Juan, Jose. There was like a group of like only 5 names that everybody got. And it was based on the Catholic saints. And so I can't speak for the kind of like melancholy of that name. But it does for me resonate with the kind of melancholy of many things within the Catholic Church. I was also raised with the Catholic faith too, so my mother was raised that way. And so, yeah, I think that melancholy is really much a part of the land as well. And when I think about the grief within our traditional Cholon language, it is also coming from, it feels like something that comes from the Catholic practice too.
And Diego, I was just thinking that your question maybe forges a bridge back to this sort of thread of archival practice that especially connects everyone here, but especially Ala and Christine, your work, where you're engaging with archives and historical narratives, but always, the question sort of what if, right? That you kind of insistently repeat as this refrain in Act 1 is so powerful, because you're dealing with the documentation of a history that is, but it's the sort of tool of imagination that's necessary to like get out of the trap of like the endless repetition of the cycle of violence embedded in that history, right? And Christine, like for you, sort of cutting in, these citations from Spanish colonial archives and studies with this sort of embodied walk and kind of visceral reconnection to land and place in and through the sort of violence that was enacted there also is sort of a what if, right? So I don't know if any of the artists want to reflect on the sort of, I guess, both reliance on, but also paucity of archives when trying to imagine a future like other than the violent known terrain, right?
Can I add to this? Yeah, I think like to both Diego and Jessica, because the question was like, so how, like basically like how do you use art to cope with the world, right? And I think, and I do insist on this, although it might sound a bit cliche and romantic, but I think art can make change. Art can change people. It has the power to change people, and change not necessarily, like that you see an artwork and then you sleep and you wake up a different person. Like it's not this. A change can be a very small thing. It can be, like just make you think about other things that you didn't, like you weren't aware of, or it can expose you to things, or it makes you see your life in a different way, right? And it somehow it also can activate kind of emotions and feelings within you that other things couldn't, in a certain way. And I think this could be a change, and change also can be on an individual level or on a collective level. And I think, yeah, art is a political tool that can make a big difference and can make big change in people's lives. And so yeah, and basically, I don't know, like it also, like brings me back to the plant, to the Japanese knotweed, and yeah, it took me a long while to understand what I want to do with this plant, right? Like why I'm working with this plant. And whenever I presented my work or I explained what I do, and then I always got these questions like, so what do you suggest? Shall we start eating the plant? Do we need to, produce paper from it? Or, like, etc., etc. And I was like, no, that's not the point. Like it's not, if we can utilize the plant for this and that, then we should accept it. Like that's not exact. Like it's actually exactly what I don't want to say. And it's more about how we see things. Like it's and we see things in connection to other things. Like you can't talk about that problem, if there's a problem of invasive species, without talking about colonial history and without talking about like ethnobotany and agriculture and monoculture and seizure of lands and like etc., etc. Like things are not like they're consequences of historical events and political events. And yeah, so that's what I wanted to do, like with bringing the history of the plant, because it is a history that has many histories, and they're all connected. It's also like, so there's like there's the plant, there's the colonial past, there's like the implication of the royal families in Europe. There's also like excuse me, there's also the naming and the classification of plants, which also like problematic in itself. There is like as well the like the question of like language, the violence of language, the literature, like the HIV problem, and etc., etc. So they're all together, like you can't just separate these things. You can't talk about Japanese knotweed and like not talk about many other things, like. So yeah, I mean, that's it.
Thanks. Cheryl, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was less of a question and more of a, I mean, in many ways, Ala's answered what precisely I was going to say. I mean, Ala, your work is completely inspirational to some thinking that I've been doing with Diego recently, and it reminded me of some work on Himalayan balsam. I've got an interest in Himalayan balsam, but also Hottentot fig. Now, if ever there was a violent name, Hottentot fig from South Africa is, and it it's seen as a real problem in the southwest of England. Himalayan balsam is very similar to Japanese knotweed. It's considered noxious, and I was interested that there are artists now and crafters, but their starting point is this is a problem. What if we used it in a way that it wasn't a problem? What if we could eat it? What if we could turn it into paper? What if we used it as plant matter? But those what ifs are very much about centering the human and dealing with the problem in a different way. And I've been really struck by Christine and Jessica's contributions, and also Beatrice's contributions. What if we thought of those plants as kin? What if we understood where those plants came from and the social relations that brought them here in the first place? What if we loved those plants instead of calling them invasive weeds? So all of the discussions that we've been having about language and about social histories, they're the things that matter, not necessarily thinking about plants in terms of their utilization for human beings. It's about interrelationships and knowledges and languages. And I think I just want to say that the contributions today have just been so inspirational, and I've really valued everything that everybody said today. So thank you.